The BBC is no ordinary media outlet, and its presenter is no ordinary journalist. But the network's wall-to-wall coverage has raised questions of its own. After the confirmation that Hugh Edwards, a prominent BBC anchor, was the unnamed person at the heart of allegations of sexual misconduct, ended days of breathless speculation that consumed British public broadcaster. It left a lingering sense of unease and doubt in BBC's credibility as a whole. It's time the BBC remembered they have a duty to be fair to the audiences and licence fee payers. Can the station get back to what it once stood for? All of which brings me to tonight's Duel. So is it time to defund the BBC? Joining me now are my duelists, Emma Webb, UK Director of the Common Sense Society, and Sharar Ali, former Green Party Deputy Leader. Sharar, first off, let me ask you, what is your take on this BBC situation?
Well, I think, firstly, we are going to scrutinise the BBC as a publicly funded organisation, and I think that's only right. I do think there is a place for that kind of a broadcaster, but if the BBC carries on either wasting money, squandering money, or acting unethically, or employees acting questionably, then I think their days are increasingly numbered. And certainly the model as it currently stands is past its sell-by date. I think there are two issues really here with respect to that particular story. There's the professional ethics of the man at the centre of the storm, and then there's the media ethics. I mean, the absurdity, actually, of wall-to-wall blanket priority coverage on the news bulletins on a daily basis, which were irresponsible in their own right because it was fueling speculation about the identity of the individual, but also, in terms of media ethics, to put that ahead of war or floods or climate emergency, I would say that that was itself irresponsible and well beyond the justification which you could put on it, important though it might have been in terms of infractions or misbehaviour. It was well beyond where it should have been placed within the news agenda for the BBC for days on end.
Yeah, and Emma, there was almost a element of satire to this, wasn't there? Seeing the BBC report on the BBC, and I remember there's one shot where they zoomed out on their BBC centre while someone in the BBC centre is talking about the BBC. It's just all so meta.
Yeah, and I think there were a lot of people who were annoyed. They were annoyed with the BBC for throwing their own presenter under the bus, but they were also annoyed with the BBC for not doing enough about their own presenter. So it was a lose-lose situation for the BBC. Look, you know, I think we actually crossed paths for the first time, Calvin, when you were working for Defund the BBC. So as a small C Conservative, I love our great British institutions, and I want our institutions to flourish. But the fact is that the BBC is not the institution that it once was, not in any sense. And if you watch any footage, which on the rare occasion I do actually tune into the BBC, usually in a hotel room or something where there's no other option, and you see just how fundamentally biased in its bones the BBC has become, that it presents this very, very narrow vision of British society that excludes the vast majority of people. And I think that the British public, through all the scandals that you just mentioned, through its own programming choices, through its behaviour, through its ethics, for all of these different reasons, I think the British public have lost trust in the BBC. And it seems like total nonsense that people should be paying what is essentially a tax, wanting to watch other channels. Possibly they don't even watch the BBC because their figures seem to be dwindling more and more. Why should the British public have to pay the BBC? I think fundamentally, in order for it to survive, or even for it to get its act together, you know, it's going to need to reform to some other kind of model than the one that we're currently using, because it's just outdated.
Yeah, and I do remember that, actually.
And it's sad. I
was giving a talk on Defund the BBC to the New Culture Forum.
Yes, you were.
For some reason you were there because you're part of the Tufton Street elite. And you were like, sound!
The conspiracy.
I was like, who is that? Why should you say that? But yes, it is. Sharar, what other method could we put in place? Could we replace this with an opt-in subscription service similar to Netflix and say, look, if you want to put out such woke content, if you want to lecture us all day, every day, if you want to tell us how to live our lives, then put your money where your mouth is and let people choose to subscribe to you?
I think, you know, there is a cultural malaise within the BBC insofar as they employ people who are like them and they project their own values. I think there is a risk and a danger in any organisation that they become very comfortable. Yeah. I would like to see a greater diversity of individuals presenting. And we need to get out of this mental straitjacket almost, this assumption, poor assumption, that we need to pay more to get the best or to retain the best.
Yeah.
You know, this is such a poor assumption. You could turn it on his head and say, in order to get the best, you need to pay less, because you'll get people who are competent, skilled, happy to give way to other people. We have so much hegemony in the BBC that we talk about news presenters as stars. I mean, this is just ludicrous. They shouldn't be part of the news. They shouldn't be seen as celebrities, nor should they themselves want to see themselves that way if they care about their role. It's absurd, it's preposterous, it's obscene to be paying 400k plus for these roles. That's not right, it's not fair. It then does introduce this ingredient that we want to know how they're spending or misspending their salaries. I think that's justifiable concern, and that's when it becomes the public interest. So let's pay less, not more. Let's have more rotation of good, skilled, competent people, and less of this celebrity within the BBC, much less of that.
Well, let's turn this inwards. Do you think we have hegemony, or do you think we're quite diverse here at GB News?
I see you as diverse. I see the skill and the professionalism within your organisation. I think it's there for anybody to see. And I think because you're dealing with the bare bones of a market, a greater market principle, I think that's a harder climate. And so I think there needs to be fairness within broadcasting. It's a fast-moving environment, and at the moment the BBC is hard pushed to justify itself.
Good. I wanted to ask you that because obviously we have different political opinions, and people often say, you guys all think the same, but of course we don't. And that's the point of this, diversity of thought and opinion. However, Emma, where the BBC falls apart is the criminalisation of the licence fee. And we know that they go predominantly after women. The vast majority of their convictions are women. Do you think this is discriminatory? As a woman.
Well, no, not intentionally on their part, of course. But, you know, maybe, you know, when it comes to these people investigating you and the constant harassment that you get coming through the door if you don't have a TV licence, which I experienced myself when I used to have a flat on my own, and I used to get these harassing letters all the time. And of course, I don't watch the BBC. I didn't have a terrestrial television or anything like that. Didn't need to pay the licence fee, and I think that possibly, maybe women are more likely to feel harassed by that. Maybe they're more likely to open the door and let these people come into their homes. Yeah. I think the criminalisation of the licence fee is absolutely insane. I think most people would think so. And I just frankly don't think that people should be forced to pay for something when they're not using the services that are provided. And just to very briefly go back to what you were saying, the BBC the idea of it was that it was supposed to be a service, and I think it's forgotten that.
And I don't know if you guys can remember, but they used to broadcast pictures of vans sitting outside houses and all these. It was a psyop. They never actually knew if you were watching BBC or not. It was all a lie.